Good morning and welcome once again to West Valley Unitarian Universalist Church's Zoom service as we bid goodbye to January. My name is Ann Harper and I am Worship Assocate for this Sunday's service. As always, it is a joy to see so many here this morning. I believe I am sensing a genuine spirit of hope and anticipation as we begin turning the pages of our new calendars. Vaccination appointment, Wednesday socializing, an open air socially distanced event. If you are a newcomer, welcome. Please plan to remain with us after this service for fellowship so that we can get to know you better. Know that you are welcome here regardless of your level of education, your financial status, ethnicity, gender identity, or religion history. Last week, January 27th, on Wednesday, was observed around the world as Holocaust Remembrance Day. We've all heard the ghastly atrocities committed by the Nazis during World War II. But delving further into global reaction has taken me to sites I would not otherwise have known about. I read about the Holocaust Memorial Monument in downtown Thessaloniki, Greece. 65,000 Greek Jews fell victim to Nazism during World War II. 50,000 were citizens of Thessaloniki, and almost 45,000 of those perished at Auschwitz. I read about the observance of the 76th anniversary of the liberation of that Nazi German death camp with the laying of a wreath at the monument to the heroes of the Warsaw Ghetto in Warsaw, Poland. Some 1.1 million people, mostly Jewish people, were killed there during World War II. Most observances were held online due to the coronavirus pandemic. We sometimes need to remind ourselves that the United States is not the only country affected by this plague, and only a few people attended the ceremony at the monument. Resources are plentiful and painful, till the one bit of information that I came across, which I found heartening, was the item about Texas Holocaust Remembrance Week. Yes, Texas. In 2019, having just been elected, State Senator Jose Menendez, along with Representative Richard Peña Raymond, introduced Senate Bill 1828. It designates a Holocaust Remembrance Week to be observed in public schools each academic year, to educate students to prevent future atrocities. After being unanimously voted out of both the House and the Senate, Governor Greg Abbott signed the bill. Quote, "We need to be sure that this horrible part of history is not forgotten or questioned by future generations, and that they learn from the lessons taught by the generations who have come before them," end quote. Senator Jose Menendez. Texas Holocaust Remembrance Week this year is being observed January 25th through the 29th. I have no announcements to make this week. Barry, did anyone get to you with anything?
No.
Okay, so we will move on then. We begin our service each week with the lighting of our handsome, inspiring chalice. Paul, if you will do the honors, I will offer these words. We light this chalice, symbolic of the warmth of community and the brightness that love brings to the world, illuminating our search for justice and peace. Light, that force that nurtures all living things, here in our midst, in this flame, so tiny, so significant. As Unitarian Universalists, we have not bound ourselves to a creed or to dogma. Rather, we enter into a covenant with each other, agreeing to do our best to live by the principles listed therein. Paul, again, if you would please project the covenant on our monitors so that we may read it together. Meanwhile, I am trying to get myself back into this Zoom session so that I can read it with you. I keep bleeping out. There we go. Okay, love is the doctrine of our congregation. The quest for truth is our holy right, and service is our prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humankind in friendship. Thus do we covenant. Our church is a small community of people, still wishing after almost a year that we could hug and break bread together on the patio and sing together in our sanctuary. Each day we are heartened by the realization that that day draws ever closer. Meanwhile, the patio and the sanctuary, the RE building, our fellowship space, and the grounds still require maintenance. The mortgage and the facilities still need to be paid, regardless of circumstances. And so each week, we take up an offering to help sustain our buildings and campus. During the following offertory music, you could use this quiet time to write your supporting check, which can be mailed to the church, or you might consider scheduling an auto pay agreement with your bank.
This is my song, O God of all the nations, a song of peace for lands afar and mine. This is my home, the country where my heart is. Here are my hopes, my dreams, my holy shrine. But other hearts in other lands are beating with hopes and dreams as true and high as mine. My country's skies are bluer than the ocean, and sunlight beams on clover leaf and pine. But other lands have sunlight too, and clover, and skies are everywhere as blue as mine. Oh, hear my song, the God of all the nations, a song of peace for their land and for mine.
Preparing for this morning's service, I asked our speaker, Maryke DesChamps, to send me a few biographical notes that I could use by way of introduction. Maryke sent, born in Amsterdam, came to America after World War II with parents, grew up in Oklahoma, graduated with a BA in education, married, moved to Wyoming. I couldn't help recalling a few years back when we were together in a memoir group here at West Valley and the charming, engaging stories that Maryke shared with the group about life during the war in Amsterdam, the adventures of relocating in 1947, and so much more. Here with her reflection on those times is our dear friend, Maryke DesChamps. Maryke?
Can you hear me now? All right. Thank you once again for being in attendance this morning. It's wonderful to see all of you here and to be with you. My story is probably not the most important or the most dramatic one to come out of World War II, but it's certainly representative of the era. By recognizing Holocaust Remembrance Day, we honor and remember all the victims, those who died and those who survived. Thank you so much for letting me share my story of my family once again, which in the course of my story, I will compare our events to the events of Anne Frank. To those of you who have heard it before, thanks for listening again. It seemed to be raining bombs. Planes dived and climbed. The air was abuzz with the drone of engines. Well, it was very scary, and the whole time I kept thinking, oh, this is going to be it. These were the words of Anne Frank on July 26, 1943. At the same time Anne was watching the bombs fall from her hiding place in central Amsterdam, my sister Rita was watching the same scene from her fourth-story flat, approximately a mile away. She was trying to rouse my parents to tell them how close this event really was. Earlier in the war, they would have gone down to sit at the bottom of the stairs to wait it out. But by now, the experience had become almost routine, and they didn't even bother to go downstairs. Both Rita, aged 12 at that time, and Anne, who was 14, felt doomed at that moment. It wasn't until the next morning, when my father returned home from work only a short time after his departure, that he announced that his downtown office building had been bombed to the ground. They all knew then exactly what a close call that had been. This is but one brief example showing the common fears and experiences suffered by the victims of World War II in Nazi-occupied Holland. From time to time, the stories of World War II, and indeed of all wars, need to be told, need to be remembered and observed, as we are doing today. We need to be reminded of the terrible cruelties and atrocities that were inflicted on human beings. In conjunction with Holocaust Remembrance Day, which is observed this week, I want to tell a few of the stories of my family, as well as those of the Frank family, because Anne Frank is actually the only victim of World War II who is universally known by name. Even though I was born when the war was almost over, the stories were an integral part of my childhood. The atmosphere of the aftermath, the experiences of my family, and the culture and values of the era were woven into the fabric of my life. They were also the main reason for my family's decision to emigrate to the United States in 1954 when I was 9 years old. After our immigration, I spent the rest of my school years in Oklahoma, absorbing a new culture and a new language, leaving the war stories of Holland far behind. But when I was in my early 20s, a friend, knowing that I was from Holland, gave me a book called The Hiding Place. It was written by Corrie ten Boom. It was about a family in the town of Haarlem, and they hid Jewish friends during the war above their clock shop. Suddenly, as I was reading it, all the childhood stories came back to me. Stories about the stress of living under Hitler, the curfews and the limitations of freedom, the near starvation of the winter of 1945, which forced people to eat tulip bulbs and sugar beets to stay alive. In this book, I saw my family's stories in print and available for anyone to read. It gave them a new validity and reality. And I realized again, this time as an adult, that these weren't just family stories, but indeed millions of people suffered, as my whole family had, at the hands of the Nazis. I then went on to read the Diary of Anne Frank, which took place in my own neighborhood in Amsterdam. Wow, I knew the names of all the streets and the landmarks mentioned in the book. My own school was located just a block from the Frank family's former home. I recalled the surroundings, the mindset of the people, and the special aura present during the post-war years as a child. Just as Hitler played a big role in my family's immigration after the war, he was also instrumental in the Frank family's immigration from Germany to Holland in the early 1930s. They went to escape the growing persecution of Jews in Germany. Otto and Edith Frank lived with their two daughters, Margot and Anne, in Amsterdam in relative peace and prosperity, while Otto built his spice and jam making business. In May 1940, the Nazis invaded Holland. The occupation brought about special laws designed to identify, restrict, and eventually eliminate the Jews. These laws made it possible for the Nazis to kill almost every Jewish person in the country. During the first 2 years of the war, the Frank family tried to maintain a normal existence. But seeing conditions deteriorate steadily, they made plans to go into hiding. Anne received her now famous diary as a 13th birthday present. In her diary entries, she writes about trying to cope with the everyday strains of growing up, while also attempting to make sense of a senseless world at war. On June 20th, 1942, she wrote this entry into her diary. After May of 1940, good times were few and far between. First there was war, then the capitulation, and then the arrival of the Germans, which is when all the trouble started for the Jews. Our freedom was severely restricted by a series of anti-Jewish decrees. Jews were required to wear a yellow star. They were required to turn in their bicycles. They were forbidden to use streetcars. They were even forbidden to ride in cars, even their own cars. Jews were required to do their shopping between 3 and 5 p.m. They were required to frequent only Jewish-owned barbershops or beauty parlors. Jews were forbidden to be out on the streets between 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. They were forbidden to attend theaters and movies, to go rowing or take part in any athletic activity in public. They were forbidden to visit with their Christian friends in their homes and were required to attend only Jewish schools. Oh, she says they couldn't do this and they couldn't do that, but life went on. In contrast, the first 2 years of the war were tense but relatively uneventful for my family, mainly because they were not Jewish. But my sister was in 5th grade when the Germans began their roundups, and Jewish people in our neighborhood began to be taken away in big, ugly green trucks. Her Jewish classmates began to disappear one by one. She happened to have a teacher who was a Nazi, and she was deathly afraid of him. He always rejoiced when he took roll and noticed that another Jewish child was gone, and he would say, Oh, wonderful. Another one is gone. He used physical abuse on my sister and also on the other students, but she was helpless. If she or any non-Nazi student registered a complaint, he could easily have had our parents and our whole family deported. So it was in the beginning of July 1942 that Margot Frank received a letter from the Gestapo demanding her to check in. If she reported, it was common knowledge that she would be sent back to Germany to a forced labor camp. Therefore, on July 8, the Frank family began their life in the secret apartment above Otto's spice business, just as thousands of other Jews in thousands of other hiding places. The Van Pels family, father, mother, and son Peter, joined the Franks, and later their family dentist, Fritz Pfeffer, moved in as well. The family struggled to carry on some semblance of normal life. For the children, it meant studying, and for the women, it was household chores. Mr. Frank continued to run his business, and he was also the children's teacher. Being in hiding meant absolute quiet during the day. Only whispering and tiptoeing on stocking feet was allowed in order not to be discovered by the warehouse workers downstairs. It meant never going outside, never feeling the sun or the wind on your face, never shopping, never going on vacation. It meant cutting off all friendships and family ties and seeing only each other, this group of 8, and frequently getting on each other's nerves. I quote from an October 1943 entry of the diary. My nerves often get the better of me. It is especially on Sundays that I feel so rotten. The atmosphere is so oppressive and sleepy and heavy as lead. I go and I lie on the divan and sleep to make the time and the stillness and the terrible fear pass more quickly. There's no other way of killing time. Food, news of the outside world, and support was provided for the families by Otto Frank's colleagues and employees. They were the sole providers and the only people who knew of their whereabouts. Miep Gies, who died in 2010 at the age of 101, wrote her own story about the experience called Anne Frank Remembered. It's actually my personal favorite of all the publications about the diary. Anne said, "It is amazing how much noble, unselfish work these people are doing, risking their own lives to help and save others. Never have we heard one word of the burden which we certainly must be to them. Never has one of them complained about all the trouble we caused." My father, who had lived with a Jewish family before he was married, kept touch with this family during the war. These Jewish people were being hidden in homes of colleagues of his at Amsterdam Social Services. On Sunday, my father was rarely home, but he never told my mother or my sister where he was or what he was doing. He figured the less they knew, the better. After the war, he told them he often visited these friends and told them the news of the outside world. He brought them reading materials and delivered correspondence for them. He took them extra food supplies if there was anything available. Several times his friends had come close to being discovered, but most of them had made it through the entire war. The Franks, on the other hand, were not that lucky. After 26 months in hiding, they were betrayed. German police stormed the hiding place, arrested the families, and took them to the German police headquarters. From there, they were sent to Camp Westerbork. It's in the north of Holland. I had an opportunity to view this site in 2001. Its original function was to provide temporary shelter for Jewish refugees from Germany. However, when the war broke out, the camp was taken over by the Germans, who used it as a transit camp from which they deported the Jews to Eastern Europe. A month later, they spent the month there in Westerbork, and then they were reported by cattle train to the Auschwitz concentration camp in Poland. Even though hope for victory by the end of 1944 always seemed just around the corner, conditions worsened greatly as the war progressed, culminating in the famine known as the Dutch Hunger Winter of 1945. During this time, the average person consumed only 400 calories a day. People sought food everywhere, in streets as well as the surrounding countryside. Anything edible was picked up. People felt fortunate even if they found a rotten potato. Many collapsed from exhaustion and died in the streets. Others became so fatigued that during their searches, they were unable to return home before the curfew. They died in barns or other hiding places. Older people who lacked the strength to go out and search for food often died in bed of starvation. During this time, my family bartered many of their possessions for food during the famine. My father walked or he rode his bike on the rims because there were no tires available, so he would ride out to the country on the rims of his tires and barter anything he thought the farmers might use or want. Sometimes it was a rope or a tool or linens. Later, more valuable items such as jewelry, including their wedding rings, which were not replaced until a good 20 years later. During that last horrible winter of the war, my mother was pregnant with me. Because of her condition, our family received a few extra rations, and these probably helped them to survive. But yet, my mother weighed less at the end of her pregnancy than at the beginning. My mother's labor began late in the afternoon of March 6th. They couldn't decide whether to take the 30-minute walk to the hospital or wait until morning. But at 5 p.m., they decided to go and left my sister at home alone. When my father had not yet returned by 6:45, she became rather frantic because at any time after 7, my father could be detained or picked up by the Gestapo. Thank goodness then at 7 on the dot, he came running in, and of course they were both greatly relieved. The next morning, my father went out to call the hospital. The big news was that I had been born at 2 a.m. on March 7th, which was also my sister's birthday. She turned 14 that day. For my family, my birth was the beginning of the end. Liberation took place 2 months later. Then, after 9 more years of planning, saving, and making endless arrangements, they emigrated to the United States, where they felt assured that neither they nor their daughters would ever again have to experience the loss of freedom. What I realized again when I read Anne Frank's diary was how close the Franks had come to a happy ending. Liberation at last. You can almost hear her say it. Instead, her mother died in Auschwitz 3 weeks before the Russians liberated it. Anne and Margot died in Bergen-Belsen of typhus in March of 1945, the month that I was born, and 2 months before the end of the war. Otto Frank was the only one in the family to survive. And later, when Anne's diary was found, he went ahead and published it. At this time, we can consider the wasted life of a budding writer, but not without the overpowering realization that we must multiply Anne's tragedy by 6 million to appreciate the full horror. Anne Frank believed that people are really good at heart. We all believe that most of the time. But we must remember that there are exceptions, as in the case of Hitler or other fascist leaders, past and present, who are racist and cruel, who maintain power through force and glorify war and violence. This is why we must keep telling the stories so that they will never be tolerated again. We must remember because memory is finally all we own. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Maryke, for the personal account of that terrible time. Excuse me, I'm a little bit overcome. And thank you to those who have made and continue to make our Sunday morning services possible. Joe, Paul, Barry, Jan, Kelly, and Paul again. A note to newcomers, once you've decided to join us on a regular basis, you will have the privilege of getting to know these exceptional people. So we conclude today's service with a unison reading of West Valley's mission statement, after which we will extinguish the chalice and the postlude will be played. Paul? We agreed to provide a safe place to celebrate diversity, draw inspiration for living better lives, foster social and environmental justice, and compassionately support each other in our spiritual searches. As we extinguish our chalice, bringing today's service to a close, I offer these words, a responsive reading from our gray hymnal, numbered 720, entitled, We Remember Them. In the rising of the sun and in its going down, we remember them. In the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we remember them. In the opening of buds and in the rebirth of spring, we remember them. In the blueness of the sky and in the warmth of summer, we remember them. In the rustling of leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we remember them. In the beginning of the year and when it ends, we remember them. When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember them. When we are lost and sick at heart, we remember them. When we have joys we yearn to share, we remember them. So long as we live, they too shall live, for they are now part of us as we remember them.